The humidity in Virginia during July doesn't just sit on you, it possesses you. It's a thick, wet blanket that smells of scorched fescue and expensive mulch. I stood on my back patio, the mid-afternoon sun turning the pool tiles into white-hot mirrors. I watched a single bead of sweat roll down the side of my iced coffee, thinking about my grandfather, Ben. He used to say that people are like high-pressure pipes. You don't know where the weak spots are until you start turning the valve. I took a slow sip, my eyes tracking a familiar glint of silver hovering near the tree line. A drone, again. It stayed perfectly still, its motorized gimbal tilting to get a better look at my filtration system. I didn't look up, I didn't flip it off. I just kept my eyes on the water, calm and observant. I knew exactly who was behind the controls, sitting in a climate-controlled living room 3 houses down, her clipboard likely resting on her lap like a liturgical text. Cheryl Maddox, the queen of suburbia. For 6 months, Cheryl had been trying to find the crack in my foundation. She sent fines for the height of my grass, the shade of my curtains, and the unauthorized existence of the very pool I was currently standing beside. She weaponized the neighborhood Facebook group, turning me into a suburban boogeyman, the hostile resident who was supposedly hoarding community resources. But Cheryl made the mistake most bullies make. She confused my silence for submission. She thought because I didn't shout at the board meetings I was drowning. She didn't realize I was just measuring the depth of the water before I pulled the plug. The escalation hit its peak on a Tuesday evening. I was in my garage, the smell of grease and old paper filling the air, when the rhythmic throb of blue and red lights began to pulse against the walls. I didn't rush. I wiped my hands on a shop rag, adjusted my cap, and walked down the driveway. 2 patrol cars were canted at sharp angles across the street. A small crowd of neighbors had already gathered on their lawns, clutching wine glasses and cell phones. And there, standing in the center of the street like she was directing a Broadway finale, was Cheryl. She was wearing a crisp white linen suit and a look of practiced, mournful concern. "Officer, thank goodness," she projected, her voice carrying easily in the quiet evening air. "He's doing it again, unauthorized tampering with the community infrastructure. We've warned him, we've fined him, but he refuses to acknowledge the board's authority." The officer, a young guy named Miller who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, turned to me as I approached. "Mr. Leeton, we have a report of trespassing and tampering with community property. This lady says you're accessing a restricted water line." I stopped 10 feet away, my hands in my pockets. I didn't look at Cheryl, I looked at Miller. "Is that right?" "He's in the pool area every night," Cheryl interjected, her voice rising an octave. She stepped forward, her clipboard clutched to her chest. "That pool is community property, part of the shared landscape. He's blocked access, installed illegal cameras, and tonight he was seen manipulating the main pressure valves. He's going to blow a line and flood the street." "It's a private pool, Cheryl," I said, my voice low and steady. "We've been over this 6 times. The bylaws state." "The bylaws," I interrupted, finally turning my gaze to her, "apply to the land the HOA actually owns. You might want to check the survey again." Cheryl let out a sharp, jagged laugh. It was the sound of someone who had spent too much time winning petty arguments. "I have the master deed right here, Marcus. This entire development is under the jurisdiction of the Brookside Homeowners Association. That includes the amenities, that includes the water. You are a member, not a monarch." She turned back to Officer Miller, her eyes gleaming. "I want him removed from the property so our maintenance team can secure the valves. He's a liability." Miller looked at me, then at Cheryl. "Sir, if it's community property and she has the paperwork, I'm going to have to ask you to step back while they inspect the equipment." This was the moment, the high-pressure point my grandfather talked about. "Officer," I said, reaching into the folder I'd been carrying, "I appreciate you doing your job, truly, but before we go any further, I think you should see this." I handed him a translucent sheet of mylar, a professional surveyor's map, and a heavy, yellowed document with a raised notary seal. "That's a 1978 county easement and title deed," I said, my voice remaining conversational. "It was signed by the county commissioner and the original developers before this neighborhood even had a name. It's a fee-simple deed for the 3-acre plot this house sits on, plus a subterranean utility easement that covers the entire secondary water grid for this district." Miller began to read. Cheryl tried to peer over his shoulder, her face a mask of irritated confidence. "That's ancient history, the new bylaws supersede." "They don't," I said, cutting her off. You see, Cheryl, you're a realtor. You should know that an HOA cannot bylaw its way into seizing private utility infrastructure. My grandfather didn't just build this pool, he built the reservoir system that feeds every house on this ridge. He didn't sell the land to the developers, he leased them the surface rights for the houses. I don't just own my backyard, I own the water lines running under your living room. The silence that followed was heavy. I could hear the hum of the cicadas and the distant sound of a lawn sprinkler. Miller looked up, his eyes wide. Wait, this map says the community pool is actually a level 4 filtration hub, and the owner has total discretion over flow and maintenance. Correct, I said. Which means when Cheryl's son was flipping burgers on my lawn last month, he was trespassing on a restricted utility site. And when Cheryl sent a drone over my house, that was a violation of federal privacy laws regarding critical infrastructure. Cheryl's face didn't just fall, it seemed to gray, the color draining out of her like water through a cracked pipe. That's impossible, we've been paying the city for water. No, I corrected, a subtle smirk finally tugging at the corner of my mouth. You've been paying the city for the connection. The water itself comes from the Leeton well system, and according to the records I finally got from your treasurer today, after threatening a lawsuit, the HOA hasn't paid its maintenance assessment to the Leeton Utility Trust in nearly 5 years. I stepped closer to her, she didn't move. She looked at the clipboard in her hands as if it had suddenly turned into a snake. You've been busy fining me $75 a day for unauthorized pool equipment, I said. Meanwhile, the HOA owes the trust, which is me, about $42,000 in backdated infrastructure fees, and since you've declared this a hostile relationship in writing, well, I've decided to exercise my right to the control valve clause. What does that mean? She whispered. It means I'm shutting down the secondary lines for emergency maintenance tonight, I said, because according to your own reports, the system is unsafe. If you want the water turned back on, you'll need to settle the debt. Oh, and I'll be needing a formal apology on the Facebook group pinned to the top. Officer Miller handed the papers back to me, a faint grin on his face. Seems like a civil matter to me, ma'am, and honestly, it looks like you're standing on his property right now. The neighbors were no longer whispering, they were staring at Cheryl. The woman who had fined them for the wrong shade of mulch was now the woman who had lost them their water because she couldn't read a deed. Cheryl looked at the crowd, then at me, her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since she'd arrived in the neighborhood, she had nothing to say. The clipboard slipped from her hand, hitting the asphalt with a dull thud. I turned back toward my house, the blue lights of the police cars reflecting in the quiet, perfectly maintained water of my pool. Have a good night, Cheryl, I called out over my shoulder. You might want to buy some bottled water on your way home, it's going to be a long, dry summer. I walked into my garage and heard the heavy clunk of the main valve as I turned it. It was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. My grandfather was right. Water does divide a town, but only if you do know who's holding the wrench.